Hi, today we'll finish up My Teacher is an Alien. That afternoon, I finally began to understand Peter's alternative plan. Actually, it took me a little while to figure it out. I knew that there was something strange going on when Peter, the kid who always knew the answer but never bothered to give it, started raising his hand for every question that came along. And suddenly it became clear to me. Peter wanted to be picked by Broxham. He had decided that this was his big chance to live the kind of science fiction adventures he'd been dreaming about. He figured if he really tried, he might just be able to make it from bright but unmotivated to being without question the best student in the class. You could almost see the gleam in Broxham's alien eyes when Peter unleashed his mighty brain. We were having a history lesson at the time, and Peter started to answer every question perfectly. Broxham started asking harder questions, but Peter never blinked. He just kept reeling off the answers. Even I had no idea how smart that kid was. And as for Broxham, I swear the alien must have been mesmerized. Like Peter was an encyclopedia, or maybe he had one transplanted into his head. When school was over, I dragged Peter off to the side of the playground. "Are you crazy?" I hissed. "What are you doing?" "Plan B," pronounced Peter. "If we can't unmask Broxham, I want to be one of the ones to go on the ship." "Forget Plan B," I yelled. "You don't know what they're going to do to you up there. They're bad." "You don't know that," said Peter. "Well, they kidnapped Miss Schwartz." He shrugged. "That still doesn't mean they're bad. They may be so far above us that they think of us as we think of ants or something." I didn't say a word, but I could tell, but he could tell by my expression that I thought that was stupid. "Maybe they're scared of us," he continued. Oh, that made me laugh. "I'm serious," said Peter. "Think of that conversation you had with him yesterday." "I can't," I said. "It still scares me." "No, think about it," Peter said again. "Maybe these people are really peaceful. Maybe they've seen how much we fight, and they're afraid if we get much further into space, we'll cause some huge war." "You don't know that," I said stubbornly. "Anyway, maybe we won't have to worry about it. Let's go to the drugstore and get our pictures." It took all of our money for the pictures, and I thought about explaining to the girl behind the counter that we were really trying to stop an alien invasion, but I figured she probably wouldn't buy that. We forced ourselves not to open the envelope until we were in the park. "You open it," I said, handing the envelope to Peter. He hesitated for a moment, then tore the envelope open and pulled out the pictures. His face fell. "What is it?" I asked. Without saying a word, he handed me the photos. My heart sank as I flipped through them. Peter had done a good job. The beams and timbers of the attic were shown up perfectly. The focus and exposure were excellent. But the force field with Miss Schwartz in it had come out as nothing but a blue streak. That was all, just a blue streak down the middle of each picture. It looked like a flaw in the film, or maybe some trick of light. You couldn't see Miss Schwartz at all. "These aren't going to do us any good," I moaned. Peter nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. "Well, it's not your fault," I replied, but I knew he didn't believe me. By Thursday, the whole school seemed to be on the brink of a nervous breakdown. Stacy got caught drawing pictures on the blackboard. Mike tried out a new word he'd learned from his uncle, and Peter waved his hand like crazy every time Broxham Smith asked a question. The ones who were really having a hard time were the kids in the middle. See, by this time, everybody was starting to believe the rumor about our teacher being an alien. And I think that fact that Peter and I knew it was true, combined with the fact that we weren't trying to convince them, was what really did convince them. They figured if it was a joke, we'd be trying to fool them. Since we weren't, it had to be for real, or something like that. Anyway, the kids in the middle were going nuts because they knew Brooks and one of the three most average kids in the class. But what was an average kid? No one knew. So none of them knew how to behave to keep from being kidnapped. Most of them just acted the same as usual, except for that they were really nervous. Every time one of them answered a question, you had the feeling they were trying to decide whether they should answer it right or answer it wrong. It was like they were asking themselves, will the right answer get me a one-way trip in an alien spaceship? I'll be glad when this is over, I said to Peter that afternoon during recess. Me too, he said, but I didn't like the kind of dreamy way that he said it. Aren't you scared? I demanded. I'm terrified, he said, but that doesn't change my mind. School just got wackier as the day wore on. By the time the last bell rang, I got the feeling every kid had heard there was supposed to be an alien invasion at the concert that night. If I wasn't so worried, it would have been funny. Did you hear about the invasion? Kids would say. Did you know the aliens are coming tonight? I wanted to say, no. The aliens aren't invading. They're just coming to kidnap some of us. Although for all I knew, the reason they wanted to study us was so that they could invade sometime in the future. I felt sorriest for Mr. Bamwick. He had hoped to have the best spring concert ever, but it was beginning to look like it would be the biggest disaster of his career. I'm cutting the stars and stripes from the program, he told me that afternoon. He was trying to be nice about it, but I could tell that he was really disappointed. I'm sorry, I said. I just can't get that twill. Well, it's not just you, Mr. Bamwick said sadly. The whole band has fallen apart. I don't know what I've done wrong. How could I tell him that he hadn't done anything wrong? That his concert was just another casualty of the alien invasion. The alien invasion rumors had reached the adults too, as I found out that night at dinner. My goodness, Susan, said my mother as she was dishing up my broccoli. I hope you don't believe any of this nonsense. Believe it, I thought. I started it. But I didn't say that. Instead, I put down my soup spoon and I looked at her. Oh, what if I did believe it? I asked. I tried hard to sound like I was interested and not like I was challenging her. Well, I suppose we'd have to get you counseling, she said. I could have cried. Obviously, there was no point in asking my parents to help out with this mess. I went upstairs to get ready. Which ones will it be, I wondered, as I slipped into my dress. Just who is the alien going to steal? I looked in the mirror and crossed my fingers, praying that it wouldn't be me. My parents drove me to the school, and they dropped me off and went to find a parking place. I wonder how he's going to do it, I thought, as I walked through the door. Will he just freeze everybody here on the spot? Will his ship use some kind of tractor beam to lift up his targets? Or will he wait until later when everybody's asleep and sneak into their homes and snatch them? The school was fairly zinging with nervous energy. The rumors about the alien invasion had spread to all grades. The third graders were walking around in pairs, checking over their shoulders every step. If I hadn't been so scared myself, I would have laughed. I wanted to grab them and say, "Stop worrying. The alien's not after you." "Hey, Susan," called Peter. "Wait up." Peter was in the chorus. The chorus was bigger than the band. Almost every kid in 6th grade was a member, and they would be singing last of all. Peter looked very nice. He had on a white shirt, a red tie. His pale blonde hair was slicked down. "Is your father here?" I asked. He just stared at me. "Are you kidding me?" he asked. We walked on until we came to a private place. What are you going to do? I asked. Peter shrugged. What can we do? Keep our eyes open. Be ready to call for help when there's something we can prove. Other than that, I can't think of anything. Is Bruxham here? I nodded. All the teachers had to come to the concert to keep us under control while we were waiting to perform. I figured Bruxham wasn't ready to blow his cover yet. Peter glanced at his watch. Oh, we'd better get into the gym, he said. No sense in getting in any more trouble than we have to. The gym was where we had to wait for our turn to perform. It was across the hall from the combination cafeteria and auditorium, where we put on our concerts. The third grade chorus was about to go on when Peter and I walked in. Get over here, you two, hissed Miss Tompkins, the world's oldest living fifth grade teacher. They're ready to start. As we walked across the gym, I heard the third grade chorus begin to sing. They had only gotten through about 3 notes when the music stopped. I grabbed Peter's arm. Had it started? Not actually. As it turned out, Cindy Farkas had fainted. The chorus teacher, Miss Benkin, stopped the program while 2 parents helped Cindy out. Then the singing began again. False alarm, Peter said with a grin. I nodded, but I didn't feel like smiling. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice. Band members, over this way. It was Mr. Smith. He was standing at the far end of the cafeteria holding up his hand. Band members, over here, he shouted. We're going down to the primary wing. Mr. Bambrick wants you to meet there to tune up. You can bet Bruxham won't stick around for that, said Peter. Not the way he hates music. Well, that gave me an idea. I might not have done it if I hadn't been feeling so crabby. But between the fact that we hadn't figured out any way to stop Bruxham from kidnapping some of our class and the fact that he was still holding the best teacher I had ever had prisoner, I was pretty mad. I decided if I couldn't beat the alien, I'd settle for annoying him. So before we started down the hall, I took my piccolo out of its case and put it together. Most of the other kids already had their instruments ready. Everyone was nervous. And it wasn't just pre-concert jitters. About half of the band was made up of 6th graders. And they were the most frightened, of course, especially the ones from our class. All right, follow me, said Bruxham as he started down the hall. Holding my piccolo behind my back, I positioned myself at the front of the group. When we got about halfway down the hall, I started to play a scale. Stop that! Shouted Bruxham before I had played 3 notes. Just practicing, I said. Well, don't, he snapped. I had never heard him so cranky before. I must really have gotten to him. I began to wonder if I could break through his false front, get him to show himself for what he really was. I put the piccolo to my lips and began to play again. Miss Simmons, stop that! He ordered again, but this time I didn't stop. Please, he said, clapping his hands over his ears. Miss Simmons, please, stop. I couldn't believe it. He was in agony. I began to play louder. Susan, he howled, bending over. Stop! I took a piccolo away from my lips for just an instant. Not on your life, Bruxham. Then I started to play again, the best piccolo music I knew, the solo from Stars and Stripes Forever. Stop it! Shouted Bruxham, stumbling down the hall ahead of me. Stop! 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 Hey, you guys, I said. That was a big mistake. As soon as I took a pause playing music, Bruxham spun around and snatched my piccolo. But I pulled it back to safety before he could tear it from my hands. Take this, you alien creep, I said, and then I trilled him with a high C. He backed away, holding his hands over his ears. I went back to the Stars and Stripes, starting at the beginning. I heard Mike Foran join me on his saxophone. Then Billy Gotch brought in his trumpet. We advanced on Broxham, playing for all we were worth. He retreated down the hall, his handsome face twisted in pain. Now the clarinets were coming in, and the rest of the trumpets, and then came the drums, and finally the deep, low, powerful sousaphone. We sounded fantastic. Mr. Bruxwick came running out of the room where he'd been waiting for us. "They're playing it!" he cried in joy. "They're playing it!" But now I heard Mr. Bleakham charging down the hall behind us. "What's going on out here?" he roared. "Smith, Rougham, can't you keep these kids under control?" "They're playing it!" Mr. Bamwick joyfully shouted. "7 years I've been waiting for this!" "Stop! Stop!" Mr. Broxham screamed. "No!" cried Mr. Bamwick. "Don't stop now! Let's hear it all!" We couldn't stop. We were on a roll, and we'd never sounded so good. And Broxham was crumbling before us. "Stop!" he pleaded. "Stop! Stop!" Adults were crowding out of the auditorium into the hall. "What's going on?" they shouted. "What's happening out here?" We reached the big finale, and I played that trill like I had never played it before. We kept advancing on Broxham. Soon the new Kinnatuck Falls Elementary School marching band had the alien cowering in a corner. "What do you want?" he pleaded. I didn't dare stop playing. I knew my piccolo was keeping him at bay. But Mike stepped in. "Take off your mask," he shouted. "Your mask," said the others. "Take off your mask." "Anything," Broxham said. "Just stop that noise." "First your mask," cried the band. Even Dr. Bleakman could see that there was something weird about his favorite teacher now. He waited in silence. I played my trill again. Broxham reached behind his head and began to peel off his face. Behind us, people started to scream. Someone cried, "What is it? What's happening?" Oh my, yelled somebody else. "It's Mr. Smith. He's an alien." I thought it was over, but I was wrong. Broxham was still crouched against the wall about 2 feet from the doors to the outside. The rest of us were about 10 feet from him, staring in horror at his strange alien features. Suddenly the door to the left of Broxham opened. It was Peter. He must have run out the front doors and circled around the building. "Broxham," he shouted. "This way! Run!" The alien jumped to his feet and took off as if he had rocket-powered roller skates. As soon as he was through the door, Peter slammed it shut. The rest of us started to run too. Then Broxham pulled something that looked like a thick pencil out of his pocket. He pointed it at the doors and fried them shut. I started to tremble. He could have pointed that thing at me if he'd really wanted to. He probably could have melted my piccolo to my lips. Maybe old Broxham wasn't so bad after all. I thought as I stood with my face pressed against the window, watching the alien and my best friend disappear into the night. My best friend. I thought in surprise. I had called him that before, but I knew it was true. Peter was my best friend. And now he was gone. Someone had called the police. Pretty soon their cruisers came screeching into the schoolyard. My mother was flapping her hands and worrying that I might have some alien disease. With all the yelling and shouting, it took the police a while to figure things out. But soon they put me in a patrol car and we hightailed it out to Broxham's place. We were only a block from his house when we heard a roar, followed by a high whine. Then this beautiful, spinning silvery sphere with a wheel of lights, lifted into the air ahead of our car. "Stop the car," I said. I don't know why, but I did. Probably because the ship was so amazing. I pushed my way past the policemen and stood in the road watching the ship rise on a column of purple light into the black night. "Goodbye, Peter," I whispered. "Have a good trip." I felt as if something hard had become stuck in my throat as I watched the ship soar higher and higher until it was lost among the twinkling of the stars. The police sealed off the house, just in case there were any aliens left inside. When they finally decided it was safe, I took them to see where Mrs. Swartz had been held prisoner. I was afraid Broxham might have taken her along, but when we climbed into the attic, we found her sitting in the floor saying, "Ugh, this is the worst headache I've ever had." "Miss Swartz," I cried, and I ran to her, and she held out her arms, and I fell into them. The two of us cried for a long time, which I think kind of confused the policeman. The rest of the house was empty, except for a note from Peter we found stuck to the refrigerator door. He asked us not to worry and said that he would probably come back again someday. And that was that. Things are back to normal now, at least as normal as they ever get around here. Duncan's been picking on everyone he can. Mike and Stacy have regained their angelic reputations. Oh, although to tell you the truth, I wouldn't be surprised if they decided to get into a little mischief now and then just for the fun of it. As for me, I'm doing fine, except for when I play my piccolo. That's when I think of Peter. Sometimes I go outside at night to look at the stars, and I try not to think about how far away Peter is. I only remember how much he wanted to go there. I do wonder where he is, and if he's seeing all the wonderful things he used to imagine when he was reading those science fiction novels. Of course, I never really wish I had gone with him. After all, I've got a family that loves me right here on Earth. I like my life here. But I wonder sometimes, what would it be like to travel the stars with aliens? Or maybe with Earthlings. I've been studying my math pretty hard lately, and I've kind of changed my mind about being an actress. I think maybe I'll be a scientist when I grow up. I'd like to invent a ship that would take me right out of the solar system, out to explore all those distant stars that fill the night sky. Worlds where we would be the mysterious aliens. Wouldn't that be something? And that is the end of My Teacher is an Alien.